Okay, all right. I'll call to order the Wednesday, February 15th, 2023 meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting will be conducted via in-person and via remote means. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with the right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 99, Verizon Channel 28, or online at www.northandovercam.org. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. If the public would like to participate in the public meeting, please email your questions or comments prior to or during the meeting to cpcemails@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be provided to the committee before the meeting or read during the proceedings if received during or shortly before the meeting. Okay, as I just briefly mentioned before we went live, we're going to take the agenda slightly out of order and move to executive session at the end of the meeting tonight prior to adjournment. So we'll move right back into our fiscal year 2024 applications as a continuation of last week's meeting. And I'd actually like to bring up, if we could, Lori Burzlaff to discuss 3 applications that are before us this year. The first, if you could, with the Affordable Housing Trust.
Okay, thank you. For having me. So Christopher, he is not here. He's the chair. He couldn't make it tonight, so I'm going to cover for him. The Affordable Housing Trust, this is our normal application that we have every year, with the exception that we are looking to get the full allocation of affordable housing. It's something that we talked about back in, I think, 2017 when I first started coming to you for funding for the trust, that eventually we hoped that we would just end up getting the allocation as a matter of practice. It's the way it's done with several towns in Massachusetts. They have, there's actually a whole, if you look at the CPC website, there's a bunch of different municipalities that do it this way, just because it gives more flexibility should something come along. And actually a good example of that is we just got a call 2 days ago from Bread and Roses that there are some properties that they are anxiously wanting to meet with us. So we're meeting Tuesday about that. So yeah, do you have any questions or?
I guess I'll kind of take it around the room. So just for everyone's clear, what I think Laurie's asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if in the event we don't have enough applications to fund the 10% minimum required by law for affordable housing, they're asking to take the supplement rather than us hold it in reserve for future spending. Am I understanding that correctly?
No,
No?
the opposite.
Oh,
The opposite. We want the 10% of the, we want the 10%.
You want the 10%, okay.
Yeah, which I think last year, I'd have to look back at the warrant, because it was in, I should have looked at it before. Last year, I think it was like 192,000.
Okay.
So that's roughly, it's 10% of whatever the allocation is.
Whatever the available funds are, yeah. Is it?
Yeah, it's
No.
around 200,000. I think that's
Yeah.
the
Okay.
ballpark. It's
Okay.
10% of the money coming in
Okay.
over the next year.
Right, 10%, because
Yeah.
10% goes here, 10% goes to open space, 10% goes, so we're just taking the allocation, not anything extra or anything that's been in reserves.
Got it.
Just
okay.
that initial 10% allocation.
Okay. Where I guess maybe I was a little confused because we don't have any other affordable housing applications this year. That's why I was, I guess, a little bit confused. But well, I'll open it up to the committee for if anyone has any questions of Laurie. Because we'll start on this side of the room, John, if you're ready. Or?
Yeah, if I understand 10% in a year that there's no other projects, but you're saying if you take 10%, what happens if there's another project from some other place?
Well, you have the reserves. All your money.
How many towns and cities do the
I
10% automatically?
Believe I counted 27. I thought I had that with me, but I'm pretty sure it was 27. I know Cambridge does it. I mean, I can get you, are you voting on this tonight?
We are
No.
not. voting.
I can get you the information. I thought I had it with me, but again, I wasn't.
And I mean, I think
Thinking I would-
that what would be relevant is sort of more peer communities than, I mean, Cambridge is a large city, but, I mean, if you give it, if there truly are 27, we can look at it ourselves.
Okay, I have the list, I just don't have it with me.
And just in terms of the governance of the Affordable Housing Trust, how many members are there? How is it appointed? I guess, how does the governance fit in?
So we're appointed by the select board for 6 years.
How many members?
We are 7 members. There's, 1 member of the select board is on it. We're controlled by statute and also the recorded trust, which is in the registry of deeds. We cannot disperse any money unless we get the approval of the select board. Under certain circumstances, we also have to get the approval of the finance committee. What else would you want to know? I'm
No, that's
trying,
fine.
yeah.
That's fine.
Tim, any questions?
When would we know some certain amount of money? In other words, how much?
When will we know the exact amount?
Yes.
Probably, that's actually a good question, which I will get an answer to. I don't know the answer to that right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, the problem is you won't know till the end of the year. The only practical way to do it is you just estimate it.
So,
Yeah.
I'm envisioning the town meeting, and I just don't envision seeing 10% as a line item
Yeah.
in the CPC funding.
Well, we have
Yeah,
to
we
do,
can
when we fall
change-
short, we have to do it. Right, we have to make that
Is it-
allocation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you probably, if, assuming we did it, you'd, take your best estimate, maybe add a few thousand, so it's like 210,000, or I'm making it up, but that's the easiest way to do it. And then if you had to do a true up, you just have a reserve for it at the end of the year. Yeah.
So every year in the warrant, there is the allocation for what was given the previous year. So if it makes it easier, that's also an option to use that number. If you read the explanation on the CPC article at the bottom, we always put in there what the allocation was for the previous year.
I had the same question as John about just the number of municipalities that actually allot 10% or whatever the proportion is. So
Okay, all right, well, we can.
we can get that information, so
Yeah,
I'm good.
okay. Bill? Terry?
Yeah, the only thing I have is, it was always kind of nice where you came in with a particular project and said, hey, we're looking at this house. We want to partner with them, and this is what we're going to be doing. And I kind of felt nice, good about it. Now it's just, if we're just going to give 10% and we don't have any idea or any control over where it's going to go, it's just, it's, I mean, I'm sure your committee's very capable, but I'm just saying, it's just, we're just changing our whole direction on how we've done it,
Jack?
Yeah, I guess, what's the purpose? Well, why are you asking for the change?
So just to be clear, back in 2017, we originally started with this. So we always wanted to come in for the 10%, whatever the allocation was, but at that time, the committee definitely did not want to go that route, so we adjusted our plan. So I feel like we've been good stewards of the town's money, and we are looking to do it mostly because things come up during the year that you guys can't fund, that we can. So I'd hate for us to miss opportunities throughout the year. CPC can only allocate funding once a year. The trust can allocate funding all year long. And like I said, we have Bread and Roses, who's coming to the Affordable Housing Trust meeting on Tuesday to talk about, I think it's a total of 5 units that they are looking to renovate and build and make affordable housing. I don't know what they're going to be asking us for, but if, that's just an example of if we had the flexibility to use the funds throughout the year, they could have come to us in August and asked, or July. I mean, with real estate, I'm sure you guys know, you have to jump on it when it's there. You can't wait a year to get it approved. And I think that you still do the reporting system, right? As far as quarterly reports?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we do.
Would you be able to tell us how much over like the end of the last 3 years, how much money is in the fund?
From the CPC?
Right now, yeah.
No,
800
in your fund?
Yep, it's approximately 800,000 in the fund. We have earmarked about 500,000 for Fountain Drive. We have earmarked, I think we have a little under 100,000 for the down payment assistance program, which is still going on for first-time home buyers. And the rental assistance program is also still going on. That's about another 50,000 that's left from what we originally allocated. I can get you a complete accounting of but we have not, money that's not earmarked, probably around 300,000.
Because, I mean, you know, obviously, the whole issue of, well, housing is expensive, as you know better than anybody else. So if you're going to go into housing in any serious way, the problem is you're talking at least 7 figures. You don't have 7 figures, I guess. Like, what opportunities are you going to pass up by not having an extra 100,000, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm doing it not to be difficult, but in a larger context of how do you fund these sorts of things, given that they're very expensive?
Well, in the past, the Bread and Roses housing, we've only funded 100,000 to 200,000. It's their model. We don't fund the whole thing. They buy the land. We help them with that and the renovations, but we've usually kept it between 100 and 200,000. We don't fund the whole thing. Fountain Drive's a different story. That's going to come in front of you probably 6 or 7 years from now as a joint application between the Housing Trust and the Housing Authority, or actually probably just an application from the Housing Authority showing that we are also giving funds, because it is their property and their project. But yeah, I mean, I don't see us going out finding $1 million, projects to do, and no, the $100,000 is not going to make a difference. I'm more thinking of, say, Bread and Roses has these 5 units, and they're going to do them in phases, and they're going to do 2 units this year, 2 units next year, and 1 unit the year after. Then we've got the ability to help them do that. Again, I don't know what they're going to be asking us for. I think she just wants to come in and fill us in on what their idea is.
Okay. Ron?
If
check
we
in.
allocate the 10%, how do we know that that money is actually going to the purposes as defined by the Community Preservation Act?
The trust has the same purposes as CPC, so it's a law. We can't violate the law.
Yeah, I think by definition, any of the funds that you spend
Yeah,
would
they fall under
meet our
CPC.
criteria.
Yeah.
No, from that perspective, for support or acquisition of affordable housing, right? That's
Yep.
what it is. Okay. Ron, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Lori, I have one question. You kind of touched on it very quickly regarding the down payment assistance program, which I think was relatively new since last time you talked to us. Can you give me kind of a quick explanation of how that works? I mean, I read about it in the application.
Sure.
We'd like to understand a little
So
better.
it's based on income, and you have to be a first-time home buyer, and there's a certain definition of first-time home buyers. And we will provide up to 10% of the purchase price, not to exceed $30,000. We had 1 closing last year. We have another closing coming up next week. Very excited buyer. It's really, actually, this buyer had a dual, it was benefiting us in 2 ways. They bought an affordable unit that was about to become not affordable. So it's nice. We were able to preserve that and keep it in the affordability stock. So we allocated 200,000, 100,000 that came from you guys and 100,000 from our funds. And it's out there, the realtors know about it, and they fill out, it's a very long application and a process that Bread and Roses is administering. And we pay them per application to administer the program. And we have, about 150,000 left.
And is that, so you think you've seen some success where there's demand for it? I mean, I look at that and say, okay, if it's in smaller chunks, kept at 30,000, does that give the ability to be almost more of a force multiplier and to help more families rather than just acquiring properties? Is that the goal behind it?
Yeah, the goal was to try to help as many people as possible with the funds we had. We've talked about possibly increasing it because it's hard for, it's really, when you look at that amount and what the program is, the only thing people are going to be able to buy are condos, and that's what the last two have been. And if, you know, we're glad we can help in that respect, but we were hoping that, you know, we were talking about raising the amount so that to give people a little more ability to buy, you know, a single-family home if it's even possible with the income. And it is same as CPC income limits, 100%. So it's a good threshold. I mean,
I just have two other questions for you. What other source of funds does the trust have beyond CPC dollars?
nothing.
Nothing. Okay, so you're solely funded through CPC? Okay.
Nope, not until there's a bylaw passed that
Okay.
gives us money.
Okay, I think that's, okay, I don't think I was fully aware of that. And then properties that are acquired, what is done to make sure are they deed restricted to stay affordable, or is that of an expiration? Okay,
Yep, in
Okay.
perpetuity.
in perpetuity. Okay.
Yeah, it used to be, they changed the deed restriction at one point, like a foreclosure wouldn't last through foreclosure, or, I think there was some other circumstance, but now it's in perpetuity, so.
And I had one other question on the down payment assistance program. You referenced there that if the property owner stays in the property for 10 years, the loan is forgiven? So
Yes.
is any of the loan ever paid back during that interim 10 years?
Yes, so after, they have to, if they sell the property or transfer the title in any way, or default on anything, in the first 5 years, they have to pay the full amount back.
Okay.
And then every year after that, it decreases by 20% until it hits the 10 years, and then it's completely forgiven.
Okay,
So if they stay in there for 10 years, they don't have to pay anything back.
okay. Got it, okay.
Inclusionary zoning may lead to payments in lieu of fee.
I know, that's what I was saying.
Okay. Oh, I didn't have that. I thought this was the only source.
No, I know, I said unless a bylaw is passed.
Inclusionary zoning passed.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't, oh, was that at last year's town meeting?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I guess we will have funding if anyone ever builds under the inclusionary zoning bylaw
And
Okay.
opts to pay in lieu.
and opts to pay in lieu, but we haven't seen
Got it,
anything
pays
yet.
in trust,
Our
okay.
initial funding came from Edgewood.
Okay, and to date,
That
all
was
your additional
basically
funding has
payment.
come from CPC only?
Yeah.
Okay, got it,
And the interest that we earn.
got it, okay. I don't think, does anyone has any other questions for Lori on the housing trust? Okay, excellent, thank you. Don't go anywhere.
Nope.
Next up, the application for $50,000 for the Neil painting at the Stevens Estate.
Okay, so if you remember, this came in front of you before the Stevens Estate was entered into, the town entered into a management agreement for the Stevens Estate. Joanna had originally brought this, and we asked her to withdraw the application because we were in the process of going through that whole thing. So now it's coming back because it's definitely something that needs to be done. It's a valuable painting that is owned by the town, so it's in our best interest to make sure that we take care of it properly. And I did confirm with the person who's doing this, I think his estimate was from 2022, it's the same. I asked him if this was gonna increase at all, and he said no, so.
Okay.
It's basically to get that painting restored.
I think I recall that a few years ago. I'll open up to any questions.
Yeah, how do you know the painting is worth what it's gonna pay to restore it?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, because I've sort of heard through the grapevine that this guy's paintings are worth nowhere close to that amount of money.
Okay, that's news to me. Like I said, I kind of just took this over from what Joanna did. I assumed that that kind of research was done, but,
And it's not even clear that it's an original, and maybe a copy of a picture that's in the museum. in Minnesota, somebody told me. So, I mean, it feels to me that I think preserving our historical treasures is important, but if the thing is not worth anywhere close to that amount of money, it's not even a original by this person, does it really make sense to spend that much money?
Okay, I mean, I just assumed that the conservationist would have told us that it wasn't an original, or it wasn't a painting, like, that would have been, I would have thought that would have been his, part of his evaluation of the painting, but I
And
can,
we only did get one quote to fix it, right?
we did, yep.
No? Okay.
I have the same questions, John. Like, how do we know that, what's the value of the paint right now, so.
Any questions on this one?
That came up last time, and Frank McCarthy, remember he looked into it, he followed that stuff at a museum, and he had a lot of question on the worth of the painting, and they were gonna get back to us. They were gonna check that out and have somebody give some type of an appraisal, but I never heard back, because they withdrew it.
Who was going to, Joanna?
Yeah, I think so, Frank,
Frank McCarthy, who was on the committee
he
at
was
the
on the committee
time,
back at the.
Okay.
brought that question. I do recall that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this, so.
Jack, any questions?
No questions.
Ron? Do we know if has it been, again, this comes to an eligibility question, if it's been deemed a historic significant artifact by the town historic commission?
I do not. I can
Okay.
find out.
Okay, I think we'll just need to, I don't think it needs to be like on a register anywhere, but I think the historic commission needs to at least note it as historically significant for it to be eligible, so. Okay.
If you have somebody that you want me to call to appraise or get information, please give me the information, because I'm not familiar with this painting at all.
Okay.
This was done actually by Fireside Catering. Fireside Catering found this person. And I think they've used him in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, from what I've heard, this guy's probably the best, but there's other people that do it who might be less expensive.
Okay.
As for an appraiser, I'm far from a fine arts degree, but we're happy to, I think, help to figure out where we can get that done. Maybe there's some, I don't know, we can investigate that between now and we have to vote, so. Okay. Well, if you're not sick of us yet, the carriage house application.
The carriage house. So it's actually called the Stables.
Oh, sorry.
We've been calling it the carriage house for years, but have found out that we've been wrong. I'm sure a lot of people knew that already, except for me, because I just looked at the historical information recently. So we have the support of the Historical Commission on this one. There's a grant through the state that is up to 100,000, but they told us that don't expect 100,000, you'll probably only get 50, because they only have $1 million and they spread it out. So originally the plan was to apply for the grant this year, which is due in March. In order for us to do that, we have to spend $20,000 to have an architect do the part of the application. It's a requirement from Mass Historical. So what we'd like to do is, and the matching funding is also a requirement. So what we would like to do is, if this is approved, use the $20,000 to pay for the architect, and then apply next March. But that way we could already say that we have the funds, the matching funds. So it actually makes for a better application, to be able to tell them right in March that the matching funds are secured and that we don't have to wait until May for town meeting to find out whether we have funds or not for an application that's due in March. So that's basically the game plan. Obviously, we're gonna apply for the full 100,000, but they have told us, don't count on it. I don't know why they put it out there, then they should just tell you 50,000's the max. Maybe next year they'll get more money, I don't know. But the state delegation was at the select board meeting a couple weeks ago, and they were gonna, give us a letter of support. The Historical Commission has given us a letter of support. And, hopefully we can get it done, because it's about to fall down.
Okay.
And also, just a note, there has been, to date, about $380,000 that we have spent this year at the Stevens Estate, not including the, well, actually, it would have been including part of it, for the gatehouse. It's being renovated, and they're going to have a caretaker live on the property so that we don't have to worry about things going on, and it'll be there for all the events. And
Who spent that money?
it was from the Stevens Estate. We get the management fees.
Okay.
So from that and what was left in it last year, we've used that money. So part of the agreement is the money that we get from the estate gets folded back into it. We had a capital needs assessment done, which I sent, Jean added it to your packet this afternoon, because I realized that I forgot to include it in there. But I sent you the section for the stables, the carriage house, that shows you the breakdown of the costs and what's needed for the maintenance to get it stabilized. But I do have that whole full report, and once we have a chance to sit down next year, we are going to go through and do a 5-year capital plan for the estate based on the income that's coming in. So it'll be fully funded through its own.
We'll start on the other side. Ron, you have any questions?
No, this has already come, as she mentioned, come before the Historical Commission, so no questions from me.
Great, great.
I think it's a sensible first step.
Yeah, do you have any plans for the building? Like, does anybody get any thoughts? I know some people do, but I don't know what you guys have.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're not gonna be managing it, it's Fireside, so really, they have a right in the agreement to, decide how they wanna use it. Of course, we work really well with them, they keep us informed on everything, and we have tossed around, remember, years ago, they used to have, meetings in there, events in there, it's a possibility maybe at some point that they're gonna wanna have it to be lodging for the weddings that are there, maybe the wedding parties to stay, or conference, I don't know. But it's a good question, because it's also something that the Mass Historical Commission wants to know. What is the end goal with the building, once you get it stabilized? So their grant is basically, they look for properties that are really in dire need of having to be torn down. But they also want to know that they're not giving a grant where it's going to remain empty. So we're hoping that once we get it stabilized, then we can come up with a plan of how to use it.
I agree with it.
I mean, we would love, if you have any ideas, certainly.
Well, I
let me know.
can tell you that Rick Gorman's talking about a summer camp up
Oh,
there.
yeah,
Using
no.
for the woods and the
Yep.
cross-country team, in case there's ever a severe storm comes
Yep.
through, whatever, a building that they can go into
Yep.
to get out of the weather. Those are things that came up over the last year.
I do think that's probably the way that we would be leaning, because they also want a place for programming for Audubon, Mass Audubon, who's in charge of all of the land around there. So they want to have some programming, so it would fit right in with the youth center.
I'm all set.
I just had a question, Larry, on obviously there's an architect that would be involved. Do you have any idea what the magnitude of repairs are to stabilize it?
So the architect hasn't done their job yet, but the maintenance study that we had Windover Construction do, it came out to $196,000. And they said that that was based on, when they did the numbers in December. So who knows what it's gonna be a year from now.
And that's basically just to stabilize the structure, so
To
it's safe?
stabilize it, nothing else. And when I spoke with the architect, when they were giving me their estimate, we agreed that it would be, everything would be taken out down to the studs, because one of the big problems is mold.
Yeah.
So we don't wanna leave any of the plaster in there, anything. I just wanna bring it all down to the studs, get it stabilized, and then come up with a plan.
Okay. So I guess obviously the restoration of it would probably somewhat be determined by what the use would be for the building in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
The goal of this is to just make it one big empty space
Yeah.
down
Basically,
to the
got it.
studs, and then we can figure out how we need to divide up rooms, or maybe make it one big hall, dance hall or something, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
John?
Lori, my recollection was, and Terry, you might remember, didn't a few years ago we throw a small amount of money at this, just it kind of like, as bad as it is now, I think it was worse before, but I'm just trying to.
Something to stabilize the roof.
Yeah,
I was
I
gonna
mean,
say,
I'm
I
just
think it
trying
was
to.
the roof.
Yeah, I've been just thinking we ought to just, if somebody asked a question, like a town meeting, just, yeah, this is what we did it for, and I think it all worked out fine, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the roof, which they did, but unfortunately with the animals and the water that got in, I think before we fixed the roof, now it's all
Right,
mold.
yeah, I mean, and the only thing I think is, obviously the full cost of renovating is gonna be pretty substantial. And I would think that the party that runs this facility would be smart enough, if we're gonna put most of the money in, it's gonna be a municipal use. I mean, I doubt they would object to that. I certainly hope they wouldn't,
No, their first thoughts actually were for the Audubon to have programming in there. So,
so, good.
yeah.
No, it's great. It's a great building.
Yes. Save the best for last.
Addressed. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
All right. Next, Andrew, would you mind come up and we'll stay on our historic theme right now?
Thank you. For the record, and for those who don't know me, Andrew Shapiro, Assistant Town Manager, Director of Community and Economic Development. I've applied for $30,500 in CPC funds to essentially represent a grant match for a grant we are applying for. We're also applying to MHC, Mass Historic Commission, but for a separate grant round specific to planning and survey. And the project would be a historic preservation master plan. And it's exactly as it sounds. It'll kind of be a 360-degree dive into everything we do in terms of historic preservation. It'll look at our sort of system of governance, the Historic Commission itself, the 2 historic district commissions. It'll look at all sort of our historic assets and what we do procedurally and programmatically to protect them and work with them. And it'll also basically result in sort of a blueprint or a set of recommendations we can do to improve upon the system we already have in place, which is, if I can say so myself, it's already a pretty strong system. But we haven't just taken this step of doing the overall master planning. It is something that is identified in our overall 2018 town master plan as a strategy. And so we wanted to, I also sit and with Gene and the planning department on the, as a staff assistant to the Master Plan Implementation Committee. So we're always thinking of ways to continue to advance master plan strategies, and this is one that's been hanging out there. The $30,500 does not represent an even 50-50 split. That is what's required from the grant. They asked for a 50% match. I asked for more than that in full candor because similar to the issue that Lori had raised, MHC tends to provide less funding than one might imagine they would get for any given project. So I'm basically accounting for a $15,000 grant from MHC if we're so fortunate to be awarded a grant, which this would fund the balance. Now, of course, if we do get more, I would certainly provide any excess funding back to the CPC. And we did receive the grant amount is based on a proposal received from a well-recognized consultant in this space who has done other master plans in other communities throughout Massachusetts. The one that springs to mind immediately is they've done one in Beverly, and I believe they've done one in Concord or Carlisle. And so they've worked in the state, and they've also done these types of plans and efforts in other places in the Northeast as well. So I think we'll be in good hands if we use them, or certainly we'll find another firm if need be as well. So.
Okay. All right, I'll open it up to any questions. So John, I'll start with you.
Andrew, can you give like an example of like I don't know, one of the principles or results or, you know, findings of it? What would be the kind of thing that would come out from it that differentiates it from like what we've been doing to date?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think one strategy that could result, and I'm spitballing here, is, we were just talking about the carriage house and how it's been in disrepair for several years, and certainly we have CPC as a valid and robust source of funding to execute a project that would help a historic preservation effort. There might be other sources of funding or other mechanisms that we can tap into, so this plan could certainly point to those mechanisms if they exist. They can guide us in ways that we could prepare ourselves to utilize those resources. I think another strategy you could point to is, if we're, I pointed to the governance. I have no reason to believe that we're not doing everything the right way as far as how our historic commission runs itself, and same with the historic district commissions, but it'll look at those commissions and say, are there other actions you can be taking to, as boards and commissions to advance historic preservation priorities. So it'll be a little bit of a blueprint for those boards as well. And it also, that gives me an opportunity to also say that the historic commission did provide support on the grant application to MHC, and I provided that letter of support to you all as well. So they do support this project.
So maybe a naive type of question, but how does this coordinate with the North Andover Historical Society? So I mean, we've got applications here for money from them, and they're going to be taking mold off of leather and other tools, and I don't mean to be belittling of that stuff, but how does that all fit?
Yeah, really good question. And so the Historical Society and outside of the municipal structure, stakeholders will also be part of the master planning process. And so just like our overall town master plan considered outside stakeholders in the development of the plan, when we do public meetings for stakeholder input, they will be certainly part of that discussion to provide input as to the historic preservation programming they undertake and the projects that are important to them for their goals. And there might be strategies that are in this plan that respond directly to working with them in a more coordinated fashion on any number of historic preservation priorities. So they certainly will figure into this, at least on the public input end, and certainly there's a good possibility they'll be on the resulting strategy end.
I think it's very beneficial to bring it in line with the master plan. It's a very reasonable amount of money to bring it in line with the master plan, so I'm all in favor of it.
Thank you.
Bill?
No, I think it's good. I think there's a lot of context and depth that could help inform, like everything might help us have a framework to, if we come to have to weigh one project versus another, it'd be useful to have.
So just to be clear, though, at the end of this, we'll get an idea in the priority of what will be needed on both sides?
Absolutely, yeah. Like any good planning document, we would expect a list of strategies. We would expect, things like high or low or medium priority, or how long a period of time it would take to execute a strategy, if it costs money, how much money it might cost, and then who are the responsible parties for carrying out the strategies.
I think that's excellent, because it makes it so much easier for us, because we get projects in front of us, and then we find out later that a roof is falling down, and we didn't know about that, and we're funding something we might not think is as important. So that's a great way to do it. Thank you.
And I think it's worked even when we did the study on Stevens Estate, it helped prioritize the projects. This is on a broader scale, which I think is probably good. So, yeah.
So is this a one shot? I'm sorry, I'm not sort of. Forgive me.
I'm out of order.
Yeah, I'm out of order. Is this a living document that continues? Like, it's not a one shot deal. You do low, medium, high, or the next year comes and you reevaluate it.
So I mean, so to answer your question, yes, it's a living document in that at least I would envision it as something we'd update in the future, but probably, in all honesty, probably not at that rate. And I don't know that we would look and. Actually, I shouldn't say that. This might be a document that the Historical Commission could maybe be the primary steward of, if you will, and they could decide if they wanted to take a look at those strategies and make a recommendation back to town staff or others to say, okay, we should rethink these strategies and, you know, how they're ordered and how high they're prioritized or not. So there could be some of that, but in the case of the master plan, and that's been my primary experience in my time here, is, you kind of take a look at it as it is, and you kind of go through it, and you decide, all right, there's a funding source available to take this on at this point in time, and these issues are kind of coming to a head, so it's a good time to take it on, and you pursue it in that fashion. And it's also such a, in the case of the master plan, it's a large document with so many things, so there's always something you can be doing without having to go through the process of reprioritizing, as long as you're just sort of chipping away at it and getting at those strategies. So.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Jack?
Yeah, no, it seems like a good project, and my question was more along the lines of Tim's too. It's great to have a long-term strategy on things, but I just wondered, what are your thoughts on having public input to the final plan? Because it's going to come to town, and we're going to have to do it.
Yeah, no question. It's invaluable to have that public input, and it's absolutely the scope that I provided as part of the documentation does call for robust public input. I would expect that for any master planning process. We want the public's input, and we also want primary stakeholder input, as I mentioned before. Someone mentioned the Historical Society. Certainly want their input, and any other stakeholders in town who might have a good read on historic preservation efforts in town. We want that input.
Ron?
No questions. A couple of comments, though. So, to your question, John, one example is if we had this in place, we'd probably be struggling a little bit less with establishing the historical perspective on 400 Great Pond Road.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing that this document would help with.
Yeah.
And in general, I think we tend to be a little bit reactive in terms of historical preservation, and I think this gives us a chance to be a little bit more proactive.
I guess I'll ask a technical question. The other communities that have done this similar process, were CPC dollars used to fund their studies?
Good question. I don't know. I can certainly get back to the committee on that and do a little more research on how they funded these projects. But every community that goes through the process to get an MHC match, they have to match. They have to provide their own match. So no one got a grant from another source to fully cover this.
My question is strictly on eligibility, just making sure
Oh, I see.
that it
Okay.
follows the flow chart appropriately, since it's not a specific historic project.
Yep.
I just
No,
belt
fair-
and suspenders,
Fair question,
Chair's
and I
question.
will get some more
Great.
context around that.
because I think you sense the mood of the table. Everyone's pretty in favor of this. So, okay. All right. Any other questions for Andrew? All right. Thank you.
Appreciate
Don't go far.
No, I'll be here.
Okay. Okay. All right, we discussed a couple last meeting. All right, Christy Jackson is here from the Trustees of Reservations to discuss the murals inside the Stevens Coolidge Estate. If you guys would mind introducing yourselves for the record, please.
Christy Jackson. I'm the Director of Collections and Senior Curator for the Trustees statewide.
I'm Bob Murray, excuse me, Project Director for Structures and Landscape for the Trustees.
Excellent. I think we have your application. If you would mind give us a brief overview, and then we'll put the questions. So.
Sure. So Stevens Coolidge House and Garden has welcomed about 13,000 people to the property in the past year. And we have been steadily working to open the house, which had been closed for a number of years for tours and visitor engagement and programming. And we finished the first floor, and we're moving on to the second floor. And this grant application is for the conservation of a very large 20-panel mural in what we call the ballroom. It's about maybe almost two of this room with 20 panels throughout. It was painted in 1918 by Joseph Ramirez, and right now the condition has been failing, and this is pretty typical of this type of mural, which is made with a distemper paint, and over time, like any 100-year-old person, it needs a little bit of help in TLC. So we are coming to the committee to request some support of this project. the total of the project, which would include, which Bob can talk about, the ceiling work and sort of plaster repair as well as the mural, is about $80,000. $20,000 of that, the trustees of reservations will be putting towards it, and for this committee, just shy of $60,000. And the woman that we are using for the conservation worked on the first and second floor of the house, which has another mural down the hallway by the same artist, and that took about a year to conserve. And she's wonderful because there was a lot of lessons learned along the way. So now that she really understands this artist's work and the process, we're excited to restore this beauty. And there are three different components. The first has to do with sort of the ceiling work, and then the second and third phase are the murals themselves.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we're sort of building off a several-year plan here. We have had water infiltration into the building, know some of the problems that we've heard about tonight as well. And so we, over the last few years, we've invested in repointing the masonry. There are 6 chimneys on the building. We've redone some of the flashing, and we're halfway through putting a new roof on the structure. So we're trying to protect the exterior envelope, which we would consider a critical system for the building. And with that in place, we are now looking at the opportunity to revitalize some of the interior spaces and open that back up to the public. The first phase, as Chrissy mentioned, was really sort of working on the ceiling as a whole. It's a coach ceiling, is structurally sound, but it has shown some wear and tear from past leaks and damages. There's a little bit of plaster loss, but basically it's in good condition. And I think really most of the work is on stabilizing and restoring the mural.
And the process for phase 2 and 3 would be consolidating, so pushing back the pieces that are starting to flake off, using sort of a very old tried and true method of using Japanese tissue and hide glue, which is part of the material that was in this mural to start, and then cleaning it, and then after that, the conservator would in-paint by hand all of the losses in the room. And we do feel this is sort of a really good moment to do this because we are seeing active loss, so this will only grow with time. And now that we have the building envelope in a good place, that we feel everything is secure, it seemed like a good moment to move forward so that we can actually invite visitors up now to the second floor.
All right. I'll open up to any questions. So Ron, will start on this side of the table.
So I've actually had the opportunity to get kind of a behind-the-scenes look at what you've done so far, and it's really very impressive. I guess my question would be similar to the one that came up with the Stevens Estate painting of how do you establish a value for this mural?
It's a good question. Of course, I'm a curator, so I'll say invaluable. It's priceless, for sure. But I will say that, you know, there aren't many murals by this artist, and one of the things that we are definitely trying to celebrate are the unknown voices of the artisans who made the house. And so I think from a historical standpoint, it is priceless, if you will. And they are so complicated to make, you almost can't find many people who could just do this by scratch again. An interesting point on this mural, it's all in shades of gray if you saw the grays and browns, and if you saw the photos, the conservator, when she looked at them, said, boy, that really is all about the detail then. So it's sort of an unusual mural in that it doesn't have as much color. The other one had 30 different colors in it. So I do think it's sort of an important historical artifact to you know, really preserve, because if we don't, I think we may lose it and then we can't get it back.
May need some money in the master plan for an appraiser, it sounds like.
I'm all set.
Jack?
Have you requested support from the Historic Commission or the Historic Society?
No.
Not for the murals. We have just recently for the re-roofing, so we went through the Historic Commission to get approval, even though roofing is not jurisdictional. They wanted to have input on that, so we did go through that, but we have not asked for their support for this proposal.
I guess out of my own, is this part of the Old Center Historic District?
Yes,
Those
that's
falls
correct.
into that, okay.
Is that, should they be pursuing that, do you think? As a historic project?
I think it's a good question in terms from an eligibility standpoint, or just in general.
I'm thinking of town meeting and availability.
Probably can't hurt. I mean, the property itself is historic and restricted, so, but that's probably not a bad idea, if at least get the opinion of,
Sure.
and as a letter of support would probably be helpful. So,
Yeah.
okay,
All set.
okay. Terry?
This would be the first time for this building coming for funding from us, right? That's correct. So, currently, right now, I know you run a lot of great projects and programs there, and it's a beautiful piece, but would there be anything, any benefit for the town more that we could, if we invest in the property, if there's something more the town could get in terms of maybe the schools getting more access? I don't know. I'm looking for your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll start. I think the space is so large that we have sort of drooled over the idea that we could have some programming in there, anything from meditations and art classes to bringing school groups in, because a lot of the other rooms in this house are smaller. It's a very intimate space, and so this is one large grand space, and that was sort of by design by the architect, who his philosophy was he wanted people to come in and discover little places that are hidden, and you come through a small door and there it is. So I do think that would be something that we can open up for programming purposes. And we do offer, community free days, and a lot of the programming has been ramping up there, just overall. And we do try to do conservation and action programs to sort of bring in the public. We did that with the first floor murals, and it was really met with a lot of success. They want to see the discovery process. And even just looking at it so closely with the conservator in preparation for this proposal, I found a little goat hidden in a corner that I hadn't seen before. So I think it's really a great space to engage with students because there's a lot of histories in the views there.
Going back to what we've done in the past, get something on paper, that we have that says, okay.
Well, I was going to say, to add on to what Terry said, is that I don't remember a situation with the trustees in North Andover where we have ever funded any internal improvements. We have done outdoor, we did the parking lot, some conservation restrictions and so forth. And internal improvements, I don't know if throughout the state, whether you go to CPCs for projects like this, but it feels like it's different. I've always thought that the trustees, through the funding, and I think just probably everybody here is a member, that we love the trustees, but the trustees should fund the projects on the inside of the properties, not municipalities. And the only exception might be where a municipality gets a significant advantage or benefit from it. I don't know, and I'm not trying to be, that sounds awful, but the point ends up being is, I think the inside's different from the outside.
Sure.
I would just say that, we have 120 properties across the state. We have 360 buildings, so there's a lot of competing needs, you know. And so sometimes very worthwhile projects do not get the funding. And so this was an opportunity that we would like to move forward and was looking for some extra bit to help it get to be a viable project.
And I think, for the operating budget that my team manages, we do have so many properties, we can't possibly get to them all, and this definitely elevated above what we can manage, but we did want to sort of show that we want to help with this too, which is why we wanted to contribute the $20,000 towards it. It's just such a large scale room. It's essentially 20 oversized paintings all in one room with each panel. So it's a very large effort for sure.
Bill?
No, I think my only comment is I know the trustees in Massachusetts, we have an abundance of old buildings and a surfeit of funds to take care of them. So, and I know that the trustees, do a good job. If they take a building, they take care of it and make sure that it's there. And, to the extent that it's an asset for our town, I'm supportive.
It has been nice to open the house up and get the feedback of visitors who were before kind of putting their face up to the glass and kind of looking in. So now to be able to invite them in, I know it's been really rewarding to let them experience that part of the property.
I just had a couple of comments. I shared the same concern Terry did about just community access for us. My other concern was, and you addressed it with the repairs to the roof, my concern was you have failing plaster, so is there a more inherent problem above in the roof structure that if you had restored this, you may end up with the same issue further down the road, but it seems you've addressed that, so.
And I think that's one of the reasons that, we decided to bring this forward now, that we wanted to make sure over the past year that we really made sure that envelope was strong moving ahead.
Tim?
I echo what Terry has said as well. It's nice to be able to memorialize some sort of relationship, to your point, between the trustees and the interior of the space. It's worthy. It really I can see people dancing in there again. But I think we need to bring it forward into the community, into the town, and say the town has access of some sort. Schools. So.
Schools, youth center, something, but, something solid.
John, do you have any further comments?
No, I'm fine, but, funny, the thought just occurred to me, the day that I remember the trails, because the trail runs directly from Stevens Coolidge all the way over to Wire Hill. And I mean, it was great, and having events like that. Did you go to that? That was one of the best things ever, that, and more public, where there's public access for a specific reason, makes a big difference,
Yeah, I think just in given that we're going to be voting on this, I think in our next meeting, is in an effort to kind of bring this more to a head. Do we want to kind of give them more direction, or kind of let them think about it and say, hey, come back to us and say we can open it up for this X, Y, or Z? Because I don't think we're going to have a written agreement, but I wonder if we should be giving more direction, or want to hear what they want to say. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I would like to get them. I mean, I would go back and find out just what you can do for in terms of access, what you're willing to do, and at the same time, I probably would talk to the school. I would like to talk to the school and the youth center and just ask them what they would want for. One of my concerns is you run some great things there, and not everybody has access to it, and a lot of these kids never get to see what's in their own backyard because they don't have access to this stuff, whether it's financial or availability. So I would love to be able to get that opened up, that the kids in the schools would be able to give these kids the opportunity to see what's in their own.
Terry, when you were up, was it accessible? Were people able to, I mean, wasn't there a period where you could walk the grounds?
There was, yeah.
Yeah.
How long you've been there? A long time now, right?
Yeah.
That's right. So I don't want to say something. I know you know the answers. So you should tell us. I mean, there was a time that it was pretty accessible, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we would love to go back and think about how we could, provide better access to residents and different parts of the community.
And I guess, so you've started just reopening the first floor, correct, to the public at set hours, I assume, and then the goal would be to open the rest of the house to the general public, or just to members only?
So anyone can come who's a member for free, and then there's a $10 for adults, $5 for children, and then once a month there's community days and library passes and different events that are taking place. When you come into the house, we have sort of stanchions, so you can do a self-guided tour and just read and look at photos. We also have guides that are there to sort of interact with people if they want, and then we also offer more formalized tours. And so during those days, usually it's 10 or 11 to 3-ish when we have it staffed. And so for the second floor, we are looking to open that this year. The ballroom, depending on how you look at the square footage, is about half the second floor, and you have to go through it to get to one or two more rooms on the other side. So if, you know, we don't feel that we can bring people in right now because it's in such a bad state. We are hoping to, regardless of the murals, open up the second floor, 1 or 2 bedrooms at least up there, and have some tours that go up there as well.
No other questions?
So would they come back the next meeting, is that, or how do you want to do that?
No, I think what we'll do is I think we'll connect between now and our next meeting's March 9th. And we can connect and they can discuss and maybe submit something back to us that we'll have prior to us
Okay,
voting.
I'll talk to the school and get back to you.
That'd be great, and I'll funnel that back to them. And I don't know if you're available, if we feel like there's still some unanswered questions or discussion, we'll bring it back in for a quick discussion before we vote. Okay, that work? Great.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next up, we've got, as we touched on a little bit last meeting, we've got 5 applications from the Ridgewood Cemetery Association. I see Mr. LaFawn and Mr. Pellich both here this evening to help answer any additional questions that we may have on those 5 applications. I don't know if you folks mind coming up. You can share the mics.
Thank you. Jim LaFawn, 329 Osgood Street, and member of the Board of Trustees of the Ridgewood Cemetery Association.
Excellent. And Joe Pellich from 1915 Great Pond Road, and also a member, a trustee.
Good. Thank you guys thank you, Joe, for coming back, and thank you, Jim, for joining us. So if we went over, I kind of think at a high level, the last meeting, the 5 applications, I don't think we had a chance to fully digest everything yet, so we can, I guess, kind of take them one at a time if everyone's okay with that, and we'll go through and kind of similar process. So, so first on our list is the second burial ground, I think footings for the headstones. So I think Mr. Pellich gave us a quick overview. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add before we go into questions. You're welcome to.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a pet project of mine. It came before, the whole second burial ground idea came before the association when I was the president, and we deferred for a few years. But as a board, we've got a very active board. We realized that, we were the likely candidate to take over ownership and stewardship of the second burial ground because we have expertise in taking care of cemeteries. So, we did acquire the cemetery, but it's a lot different, and I think the best way is to compare SBG with the RCA out on Salem Street. Even though they're only probably 50 years apart in when they started, early 1800s for the second burial ground, mid 1800s for Ridgewood. One was the SBG is an older style cemetery where you bought a field and you laid it out and you started burying people there on an as-need basis. Ridgewood is more of a planned cemetery. It's part of the garden cemetery movement. So plantings were much more planned, road layout, family plots, things like that. And of course, there's a lot more acreage at Ridgewood as well. But when we inherited second burial ground, one of the things with any type of historic preservation you never realize is, what you're going to find. And we had boundaries that were 30, 40 feet overgrown with poison ivy that you didn't even want to get close to. Trees which were not which were overgrown, not taken care of, shrubbery, which is not particularly typical. It's not a garden cemetery. Those weren't planted intentionally, a lot of them. They just grew up and they were never taken down, were never pruned, et cetera. So basically, when we inherited the cemetery, we found a lot more work that needed to be done. We had a ground penetrating radar study done, which revealed to us hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shards of gravestones that had toppled over, broken, and then the thatch grew over them, so they're just under the surface, 6, 8, 10, 18 inches. And then, of course, that raises the question of, well, do you exhume those, not remains, but stones, and try to repair them? And right now, I think what we're looking at is mostly just beautifying the cemetery all of the stones that need to be reset so they don't join those that have already snapped and broken further. Again, we've just discovered a lot more work that needs to be done that we didn't plan on at first. The other contrast that the SBG has from the Ridgewood Cemetery is the lack of funding. Again, I'm not really sure how the North Parish did it back in 1800 or 1820, but again, the land was bought, and I think as parishioners passed away or people in the North Parish passed away, they were buried. I don't know who, bore the cost of it, but it was a much simpler time. At Ridgewood, since its founding, we have been appropriating 45% of every grave lot sale that goes into an endowment. And that's, from that endowment, we have interests and dividends that are paid, and we add that to supplement to our operating costs. Or our operating revenue. Our operating revenue at Ridgewood comes from grave lot sales and from internments. On a $1.5 million dedicated endowment, we all can even guess at 5% what that's returning. It doesn't even touch, our $400,000 operating budget. So we don't have that at Second Burial Ground. They never did endowments, or if they did, it was all used, but it's gone. So, we understand that in the future, we hope to be able to cover the operating costs of the Second Burying Ground, through the Ridgewood budget. It's the renovations and restoration that we don't have any endowments or any other funding source for. Although with the help of Brian, who gave us a very nice recommendation or letter of public support, we did recently get a $15,000 grant from the Mass State Historic Resource Archives Board, and that has to be a dedicated strictly for the rehabilitation of, in our case, we applied for the renovation of Revolutionary War veterans' grave sites. And there are at least 7 or 8 up there that we know of. So we've got that money in the bank. Thank you very much for that. So those are the contrasts between the two. We realize we've been before this committee before, and we are so grateful for your support in the past. We sit here on a night like tonight and hear about all the other great projects that are out there, and realize what a hard job you have. So that's what our request is for, and I'd be happy to field any questions.
Okay. John, I'll start with you.
No, I'm good.
You good? Tim?
I have nothing here.
The only question I had is, you mentioned those gravestones that are fragments of buried. Is there anything in the future you plan on doing to either restore those or recover them, or?
Not yet. There's a lot of controversy in that. Is, do you let lying dogs lie or whatever? Those stones, we're not even sure ownership. In general, once stones or monuments have been abandoned for so many years, the ownership of the cemetery takes those over, and that's what we've done at Ridgewood. If there's no active family taking care of a stone, we make the decision whether we're going to renovate it, repair it, whatever needs to be done. But believe it or not, even when there is lichen and moss on a stone, we've had people get upset with us when we clean them. Sometimes there's so much moss and lichen you can't read the inscription. So we clean it, and we have, because our cemetery is still active, we'll have people say, no, we don't want that. So we're really not sure what the sentiment would be if we wanted to dig up portions of monuments and do something with them. We did, there was for lack of a better word, a pile of discarded bricks. We think there was a brick wall along one side at one time, but thrown in there were foot markers, which aren't very common anymore. But in older days, they had a headstone and then a smaller foot marker, which might just have, instead of James LaFawn, date of birth, et cetera, it might just have JL and some other little inscription on it. The only thing we can think of is that someone said it's going to be a lot easier to mow if the footstones aren't here, and took them out and tossed them on the pile with brick and other stones and all. So, we've matched up some of those, and those, they're already above ground. We're thinking of trying to match those back up with the headstones and put them back. But as far as what's underground, we have no plans for that yet.
Unless it's literally sitting like on top, right?
Yeah, the
As
ones
part of
that-
the restoration.
Yeah, part of, the ones on top, we probably will do something with.
Okay.
Cool.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Terry?
So, when you were here the last time, you talked about using somebody else. I know that the Faniffs did a lot of the work on the cemeteries, right? But now we're talking about having somebody else come in. Whatever work they do, will it stay true to itself? I mean, or,
So to the point Jim made about us having expertise in that area, our superintendent actually has a business that he does that. He does restoration, he raises stones. And the contractor that we generally hire to do excavation has done so much at Ridgewood. They work as a team. So much of that work will be done by our own forces, including the iron work. So if you look at the old family plots, it's super expensive to restore that. We figured out how to do it, and a good example is at Ridgewood, when you pull it on the right, I don't remember what family that iron surrounding
Yeah,
was.
Johnson.
Johnson. So we had about $100,000 bid to repair that. I think we did it with funding from you folks for under 10,000.
Right. Well,
So we have a gentleman who's like a retired MIG welder who works for us, and then we had a restoration company that we found in like Medford or Somerville who helped us do headstones. We do it, all under the same kind of program with the same chemicals that the other folks use, but at a substantial discount. That's how we got volume at Ridgewood. When you pull in, you see there's like 500 plus stones all restored. We
so
did
when you're
that.
done, it's all still falls well within the historic.
Yeah, we try to adhere as closely as we can to the Department of Interior standards for preservation. There's some things that, it's not cutting corners, but you do have to make decisions. Like, one of the things in cemetery restoration is that when you cut trees down, you just leave the stumps, because you don't know what's, tangled in the roots of those trees. And so you either, leave the stumps there for, 50 years till they naturally rot, or you carefully grind them out, starting at the top, and you work your way down, and if you know what you're looking for, if you see a piece of a headstone, you either stop or you figure out how to do it. And, again, because our people, our superintendent has been at Ridgewood for, I think it's close to 35 years now. They know what they're looking for, and they know what they see. It's not like hiring a contractor who, digs sewer lines or water lines that, obviously at times also might come across archaeologically important things. I think our guys are in tune to it. They know that stuff moves to the surface, and we're always vigilant for it. But yeah, we've made mistakes too, and but we try to do the best we can.
Jack?
No questions from me.
I'm good.
I just wanted to, I don't know, it dawned on me that, we think what we've done at Ridgewood, besides historic preservation is, we think it's a great outdoor asset. It's an open space asset. We've never applied to you, for for purchase of land before, but we did just recently buy another piece of property on Johnson Street that, maybe 30, 40, 50 years, I don't know if any of us will be alive, will be future burial ground. That's one of the other thoughts we have to, one of the other things we have to give some thought to. But when we bought it, we didn't realize that, what a beautiful historic, barn there is on that property. So I guess the Ridgewood Cemetery, we've kind of branched out between purchasing tanks and barns and other things, and maybe that's why, we've been before you quite a bit. But we really do appreciate your consideration on these efforts.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, well, speaking of some of those other projects, is a good segue. And next on my list was the stone wall restoration at the boundary lines, which I think, Mr. Pelch, you spoke about a little bit last week. But I'll put this out to any questions if anyone's had any further time to think about and has anything else they'd like to ask on that one. I have one question about the actual location of it, because I think there wasn't a locus map in it. Where precisely is that on the property? I think it says about 550 feet, but.
It's on the left, right, all the way to the left going up.
Yeah.
What street is that?
Marble Ridge Road.
No, in internally, what street?
Oh, it's, it's,
The Afghanistan.
yeah.
And is it a property line? Is it,
Yeah, it's hard to describe because it's not, it's internal. Trying to think of, I guess it's in the southeast corner of the cemetery. So over in the, Marble Ridge Road would be the closest.
mm-hmm.
It's close to, and I apologize to being his family, the gentleman who was killed in Afghanistan, killed in action where his grave is. It's literally to the left, that whole perimeter. And I should know that. And we
call
named
it,
the street after him.
we call it New Road, right, because
Yeah.
it's the newest loop of the cemetery. It basically shapes.
Gotcha. I'm
it's
looking
that
at it now. I'm
large.
sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting, so I'm not sharing my screen, but I think I see what you're referring to. Would it be possible just to get a quick exhibit, and this may be something we go visit too?
So is this border people's backyards?
Yes.
And have you talked to the people who live in those houses and tell them what you're looking to do? And
We talk to them all the time. We've actually planted trees on their property for them. So they already, as part of that area's original restoration, we have discussions with them all the time. We have a good rapport with all the neighbors. They know if there's an issue, they call, they'll come over. I suspect they'd be very happy to have a nice stone wall between their property and Ridgewood.
How much of this is new boundary wall versus existing restoration of boundary wall?
I think most of it is restoration.
Okay.
You say it's a boundary wall,
even
though it's interior?
Yes, between the two parcels, between the abutter who would be out onto Marble Ridge Road.
When I said internal, I meant it's not part of the cemetery that directly abuts a town road. In other words, there are housing lots between Marble Ridge Road and the cemetery.
And the cemetery.
Yeah.
I think
So,
that's-
yeah, they're looking probably at the same map as you.
Yeah.
It's-
Again, I'll continue to ask my eligibility questions. I think that's what we want to make sure we understand, because I don't know if we're allowed to create new as a part of historic for that. So we may need a little more detail on that, either, I'm sure you guys got a quote on it for some sort of a scope to show how it looks. So if we can get that, that would be helpful.
So we'll remeasure it, and whatever's existing, we'll adjust accordingly.
Yeah, maybe a couple pictures would be awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That would do it for me, like, if it's an existing, I think it fits in historic, and if it's not, it doesn't, so.
Yeah. Okay. All right, any other questions on the boundary wall? Okay. Next up was 419 Johnson Street, which I think you just referenced, the large parcel, which I think we discussed a little bit last meeting as well. So again, so I'll put it back out to if anyone has any questions on the Johnson Street parcel.
one of the questions I was gonna ask is it gonna be a future burial area? And you kind of said it might, be. But until it becomes that, what do you plan on it for the use again?
So we're definitely having an internal dialogue. We've reached out to lots of people in town as well. I think personally, it's just my one board member's opinion, I think it's a perfect place for soccer fields for the community or some kind of community use. It's 5 acres, it's a big square piece, only sloping, gently. I think construction costs would be relatively low. We have the barn use, right? We have facilities there, we have sewer line. So I think, within probably some short period, we would come up with a plan to utilize that. And to an extent, not significantly, but we'd like to find out how to monetize that slightly. And by way of example, we temporarily have used our endowment to acquire that property. It's public record. We paid $875,000 for an existing house, which is in great shape, the barn and the big field. So we thought that was a great acquisition for us. And now we're going to go back to a lender, recoup that money, put it back in our endowment, and there'll be some offset. For example, we hope to use that house in the future for a superintendent, and that has some value. In essence, if the house is worth $3,500 a month, perhaps we would adjust their pay package accordingly, and that money in essence flows back to us. Hopefully we could have similar arrangement on a smaller level with the fields as well. But we don't know yet.
Yeah, I'd be looking to have a kind of solid idea of what we plan on using, and then what the town, I know right now it's great, a lot of people walk and ride their bikes and all kinds of things at the cemetery, but what would be our access there? One of the things could be potentially fields, or something that would be used in the barn, but right now we don't know, and I wouldn't want to go to town meeting and tell them that we just don't know what we would do with it, you know?
Yeah, I would say like where I kind of am stuck right now is like great preserving land that falls under kind of open space. So like if you rewound the clock and said we could acquire this open space and come up with a conservation restriction or make it for open space and recreation, that squarely fits. But under historic and the barn, you know, we kind of look at this, the test is kind of, is it a historic structure that needs to be preserved? And so I think it meets that threshold, but has it been determined to have a significance in the town and so forth? I don't know that we've met that test at this particular time. It's not to say it's like, you know, it's answered, the door is shut or anything, but I think it's just tricky right now. And I totally understand why, and that you can't have a property sale be dictated by the workings of municipal government, right? Like it just doesn't work that way. So, you know, I understand why you're here now and why you weren't here last year. But I'm a little at a loss, you know, on how to get there for this year's town meeting.
So perhaps, though, we could bifurcate the application. I think we thought that through, at least to an extent, and thought of that barn as a historic structure. The application's a bit broader than that. Thinking about planning for future fields and so on, I included a line item for survey, cleaning the edges, reestablishing the fencing, and I think it would be, we would certainly withdraw that portion of the request if this board would consider the specific line items for that historic structure. The roof is in really bad disrepair. The structure's excellent. We would welcome anyone to walk it, and you know, we can make appointments, or you know, feel free to go there. But I think it would be good practice to shore it up, if you will, in the lower level. Some of the old shoring's fallen down. It's been vacant for 4 years. So those smaller line items we would appreciate immensely. I think the roof is super important to us because that gives us the wiggle room to kind of plan this better. But again, more than happy to reduce that application and the scope of the request.
Yeah, and I think then like it does reference in the documentation, like what is the local historical commission said about it. So like a letter would be helpful.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, I think that should be required for it to be eligible under historic, to at least get that designation from the historic commission if we could do that.
So I actually just met with Stan Limpert on Tuesday, and we're talking about historic records. So it will give me a great opportunity to reach out and see if those folks agree.
That's the Historical Society.
Apologies.
Yeah.
I do that every time.
Okay. It'll work. He'll just put a different hat on and just
Same guy, different commission.
Rick, any comments?
I shared the same concerns that Bill had about just the open space, and obviously there's some planning to go into that. Obviously the barn, if it's deemed historic, certainly is a worthy project, but the overall two together, I think, kind of convolutes things.
Tim?
I have nothing more to add, although it's an interesting shaped property, isn't it, off of Johnson Street?
You almost wouldn't know it was back there.
I actually drove by it, and I like, you drive by it.
It's hard to find.
John?
I'll tell my full story. I actually had a tour there one time and actually saw a foal being born there with my kids, which is really a tremendous thing. So it has some significance there. It was a horse farm, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was late last meeting, so I may ask redundant questions. But the preservation of the barn, what's the use short-term and long-term for the barn?
So we would use the barn and the exterior building as well, in essence, for equipment storage and for other things for the cemetery in the very short term. And then, a longer or midterm plan would be somehow to incorporate the field use and hopefully use that barn as well for in theory, the general public.
Okay. The reason I guess I ask, and again, maybe when you jiggle the numbers, you'll come up with a different answer, but it strikes me as north of 400,000 for preserving a barn is a lot, and you would expect a pretty substantial public use or something so intrinsic to the use of the cemetery that it's part of the cemetery's mission, and it feels ancillary. So just in my mind, that is it worth 400,000 to preserve the barn for just sitting there for storage? And maybe it's the second chapter that makes the difference here, but the part on the fields that it's not clear to me is it potentially, if you use these things for soccer fields, is it going to cost $500,000, $750,000 to make them up to grade for fields? And what would you do there, and how would that work? I mean,
to take your questions in sequence, the first answer is we have looked at the economics, and we have a defunct facility now at Ridgewood. In essence, the building is, it needs to be taken down. It doesn't fit all of our equipment. We have to pay for storage containers outside. And that particular area is a perfect place as part of our plan to expand the veteran section, perhaps put the artillery piece over in that area and other areas. We look at it as a prime location, a very high-end location. There's a brook that, flows by that. So moving the facilities to that barn is far, far cheaper at 400 or more than building a new structure. We don't think we could build a structure for $1 million. And then the problem with building on the Ridgewood site is that, in essence, that land's so valuable, right? We should preserve that for future burials. By shifting our operations towards Johnson Street and using that barn, it makes great economic sense for us.
Good. No, that's a useful perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, and a couple other comments. The bond is just a small fraction of that 400,000, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the point, in general, I think everybody's agreed that you should probably break those two out.
Sure.
Because the rest of it doesn't necessarily fall under the historical preservation. I didn't wait for an invitation. I did go up and see the barn. And I found that it was unsecured, so I actually get to see the inside also. It's definitely worth preserving, even if it's left empty. It is very impressive, and if you get a chance, I would take a ride up there and take a look at it.
One of the, I was on the Stevens Estate Committee a few years ago, and, one of the things we learned is that things like stables, carriage houses, garages, barns are oftentimes are on the outs when it comes to historic preservation. A lot of the money is put into the main estate. So again, we feel it's another opportunity. It was frankly when we've only owned the property, 2 or 3 months now, but when we started looking at it, it was all about the land because, we were 50 years down the road, that parcel might not be available for purchase. And but when we all went out there and saw the barn, we thought it was just one of those gems in the rough. And maybe we are jumping the gun on the rest of the property a little bit, but again, we know that we won't need that land for quite a while. So as with all our property, all our stuff that we've done is always open to the public anytime. So we're like kind of searching or clutching at straws to figure out what can we do for the town with the rest of the property until we need it way down the road.
It made, at 875, it made economic sense just for the house and the barn, right? So we don't have to build a new facility, and we can move our folks there at some point, plus the house for a caretaker. It made all the sense in the world. The fact that we have that big parcel as well, just kind of at a board level and a personal level, Jim and I, and Brad and John bouncing it back and forth, we thought, well, how do we best manage the endowment? And the thought process was, well, if we could recapture the funds we expended on that, put it back into the endowment, and then create some type of, monetize this somehow, and perhaps we just can't, right? But if we could ever achieve that, that would be great. Remember, for a cemetery, our revenues are going down every year because full burials continue to go down and down. Cremations are very, very low revenue. Our costs continue to go up. Our costs for labor far exceed our revenue. And then we have to somehow figure out in the next 30 or 40 or 50 years how to build an endowment big enough so that perpetually we can maintain it. And that's just a structural problem that cemeteries have. We'll have full build out at some point. We'll no longer have grave sales. We'll no longer have interment fees. And now, we have that issue. So although, in the $2 million range, it perhaps is impressive for an endowment, it doesn't even start to pay operating costs. We probably have to be north of 10 million to be able to get an endowment, so that at some point 50 years from now, the town or the community doesn't have to step in and maintain. And we think we'll get there. Our vision is to get there.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think that addressed all my questions on that. So if you could maybe kind of break those down a little bit, and it's probably less than half of that just for the restoration. So, okay. Next was the historic documents, which I think was pretty straightforward. Unless anyone has any questions on that one in particular. This is a continuation of a previous CPC application, correct? Okay. And last one, the fun one, the tank. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions on the tank, the howitzer, the artillery piece, which is currently in Ridgewood's possession now for some restoration. So I will put that up to any questions anyone has.
Other than the cost seems fairly cheap, but I believe you said at the last meeting you should be able to restore it for that.
So we had a meeting Tuesday, and in the interim between meetings, we continue to reach out and try to find a way to restore it for even less than the grant request. We perhaps have get all the funding for it, and we would be able to withdraw the request to CPC, but we're not quite sure yet. We'll know by the time we get to town meeting. We hope to have the work done. We had hoped that we'd have it for Memorial Day, but that's a lot to ask of the folks that we're working with.
Have you received any feedback on what the thoughts would be to display this piece in the cemetery? I know it's behind your storage building, and I'm just curious as to what the reaction would be to the community of seeing a tank in the cemetery.
I think to be candid, we've seen the whole gamut on the board itself. And there was not any artillery fired, but it was pretty close. There were trustees who brought up the appropriateness of having a weapon of war in a cemetery. Unfortunately, that's part of our American history, and it is fairly common throughout the country. But yeah, I think it is somewhat controversial, and I think not maybe controversial is not the word. I think it needs to be done appropriately, and that's why we haven't moved forward with where it's placed. Obviously, it would be in a veterans area.
I guess my common thoughts are the cemetery is a peaceful place. When you display a tank, you may obviously display war. And I just was curious as to how people would react to that. I understand the veterans would obviously be probably in favor of that, understandably, they served our country. Yeah. I just thought, curious just how the overall reaction would be.
And that's been part of the dialogue as to where to place it even temporarily. So that's why we make sure it's living behind that facility for now. And as I mentioned, at some point we would raise that building and then expand, I think anyway, the military veteran section, and it would flow well in that section because we already have town graves, we have the military section, and then lots of veterans from Civil War like in that row right where that is. So
Thank you.
It's not uncommon to see tanks in cemeteries. I mean, not tanks, but cannons normally and that type of thing, right?
That was our,
You see artillery cannons, but not tanks.
you know, perhaps part of that is.
Technically, it's not a tank.
Yeah. It is artillery. But perhaps part of that is because of the cost, right? So if you go to Arlington National, you go to the bigger cemeteries or down south, they have, you know, they have jet fighters in some of the veteran sections. You know, we just happen to be in a position to get control of it for at least the next 100 years. So, and that's part of the deal, by the way, is that it gets displayed and it gets maintained. And I'm sure there's other carve-outs in the agreement. I don't remember all of them, but.
Yeah, it was a pretty, I mean, the Georgetown VFW gave us a pretty hefty list of restrictions. And, you know, I think even, again, on our board, you know, some of them, I mean, I'd rather see if it's gonna be displayed, I'd rather see it displayed with the North Andover VFW stickers rather than Georgetown. But, you know, again, it was, I think, a lot of us reacting to, you know, a request to help, you know, do some historic preservation, and you know, we were capable of doing it. We had a place where we could probably store and exhibit it, you know, again, respectfully and appropriately. But again, we haven't quite figured out the dynamics completely.
Okay. I don't think we have any other questions on that. Anyone have any other questions on that or anything else for Mr. LaFawn and Mr. Bellich? Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Bellich, I guess don't go too far. You guys are up.
What's that?
Mr.
Oh,
Bellich is up
sorry.
next for next one. Sasha as well. Yeah.
Hi, I'm gonna pass these out if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And I do apologize, there's a bit of, I missed part of the scope in these initial packets, so I just have a replacement parcel.
That's okay.
or
We can
packet.
get it to Gene or to me. We'll make sure it's part of the record. Yeah. Even if we don't display it tonight.
So what was emailed?
What was emailed is correct.
Been added to the record.
Oh, it has
Yes,
been.
that's correct, yep.
Oh, okay.
I
Great.
just was not at my office when I realized the error, so I wasn't able to reprint the entire packet, so I apologize. I'll take one page and pass it down. It's essentially the same as the application, just we kind of have been thinking through this a bit, and so I wanted to update that.
Okay.
So Sasha Weinrich, 21 Sawyer Road, here representing Black Swan Realty Trust, the ownership entity of a parcel located at 201 Sutton Street.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Do you guys have the packets? I know I emailed Jean and Brian the presentation. Do you want to put the presentations on the screen? Or, I mean, it's not substantially different than the,
I think
to you.
if people can follow along with what you're saying right here, I think that's
Great.
probably sufficient, unless anyone disagrees. That's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind giving us kind of the overview and maybe what is
absolutely.
different from last meeting or anything else.
So we talked a lot of, not a lot, but, you know, we touched upon this application last meeting. And I think a lot of what we considered in the last week was that this application really, while it is beneficial for a rail trail in the future, is absolutely a standalone project. And that, you know, we think that Sutton Pond adds value to our community, specifically our downtown area, and doing engineering work to identify how that parcel could be improved for open space and recreation, and kind of the alignment it has with the master plan lends itself to this project. We also, if you see kind of on the first page in the additional context piece, you'll see a little bit more information about the Sutton Pond Dam. So we didn't go into that in detail, but in Sutton Pond, which we did mention, there is a dam that exists. And in the fall of 2021, DCR and the Office of Dam Safety advised us that the dam was in poor condition. We have worked very closely with our own engineers to take that labeling of poor and try to move towards a fair condition. Some of that work was, doing work in the spillway as well as cleaning up some debris of fallen trees and things like that. We're still continuing some of that work as we speak, and kind of working towards that. But I think one of the things that is important to kind of talk about is that in several other communities across the state, we've been given some information that just removing the dam, quite frankly, is the most cost-effective way for an ownership entity to take care of a dam that is not labeled in good condition. And so this project would help us have a plan for the Sutton Pond area and move forward on that when we would prefer not to have to remove the dam. It would be our preference as community members that Sutton Pond remain a significant pond and not remove that dam, which would result in, not a large pond. It would result in the upstream area kind of as more of a smaller brook, like you see Kachikwick River and other areas of our community. And so that's not something we discussed at length. It is not something that is our preference. We would love to be able to work through kind of this engineering scope with this group and other community stakeholders to set a vision for what Sutton Pond could be, including, pocket parks, perhaps seating areas or some kind of structure over the existing dam, and of course, a bridge over the old Dizzy Bridge, and, in the future, have additional connectivity for the rail trail project, as determined by the Community and Economic Development Division in our, that holds that expertise and is doing most of that work.
Okay.
So that gives a bit of additional context. We have in here as well our grant application request breakdown on the second page that you'll see, and this was obviously also in the the packet that was submitted. And really what this general scope does is it helps us, decide what we want to do on that parcel in terms of waterfront restoration. Some of the ideas that were had were, like I said, pocket parks, access to the pond itself, potential to build that pedestrian bridge and to pave over the existing Sutton Pond Dam, as well as anything else that's required or wanted by the community. And in this funding request, I just want to point out that the contingency is actually, we would only want or ask for an advance with the approval and determination by the Community and Economic Development Division. That's not part of the identified scope as it exists today, and that would be for additional items or scope that we would want to add on in conjunction and partnership with other stakeholders.
Okay. I think how that would work. Okay. We'll open up to any additional questions from Ms. Weinrich. John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess I got to tell you, I'm hugely struggling with this because you're talking about spending $300,000, and that's just to start, and probably the full cost of this thing is probably going to be, if you do everything you say you're going to do, 10 times that amount. But the thing I don't understand is this: you own the pond,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Do you, if the dam is gone, do you suffer any economic consequence of that? Are you better off financially if the dam is there?
No.
So why wouldn't you just donate all that land to the town?
So, yeah, you can answer that, but there's a couple reasons, but go ahead.
So there are multiple reasons, but at least one of them. So your question is specific as to if you remove the dam, if you breach the dam, it drains the pond, it turns into a brook. And in essence, you lose that big catchment area that you have the pond on. So is from a valuation standpoint, we still have the building, right, which is part of the land for zoning and for everything else that goes with it. I think it has, some X values to that building. Commercial property, I suspect a appraiser's not gonna look at it and say, you know, let's change this value from a, 5.5 cap rate valuation to a 4.5 because it has a nice piece of land with it. But I think intrinsically, it's better to control the whole property. That said, as you know, there's lots of mechanisms where we could cede control of most of the land, but still own the fee in it. So, whatever that would mean that we would structure with the attorney, exclusive easements or things of that nature.
Intuitively, I'm sorry, the thing doesn't make any sense to me that you can't build anything on that part of the property.
Yeah.
It's virtually all wet. Why would you care as a starting point? Because I'm not trying to be difficult or argumentative, but you're the applicant for this, and you're also beneficiary of this. And I'm not even sure technically you're allowed to apply for a CPA thing for something where you're the beneficiary of it.
So when you say beneficiary, you mean we're getting the interest of the project? You mean it somehow enhances
you're
the
gonna reap a
value?
financial benefit from.
How so? So that, and I appreciate your point. I don't think you're being unreasonable or argumentative at all. But from a true value standpoint, it doesn't change the value. The way that this kind of came to fruition is that Sasha received a letter at our office in Boston. We didn't even know dam safety had an issue. Apparently in 2019, they did an assessment and they said, we want these things done, it's in poor condition. I had my first site meeting with a gentleman from Department of Dam Safety, Mr. Willett, and he explained to me how it works. And in essence, they do this all through the state, and they come to you and say, hey, we didn't do any engineering, we didn't do any quantitative analysis. We're going to make a bunch of assumptions, and we're going to qualify you as this, whatever this is, poor or moderate. And what our goal is to dismantle dams in the community, in the state, in the Commonwealth. And it didn't make any sense to me. It made so little sense to me that I, in some regard, panicked. And I remember calling the chair of the Conservation Commission. I called Gene, I called Amy on Concom, and said, hey, can we have a site meeting, because this doesn't make sense. They want, in order to maintain the dam, they want you to cut every tree, and there's supposed to be no tree on this dam. The trees are 100 years old, right? So there's big, big oak trees on this dam. It's never been enforced, but now it's something that they're going to enforce. The dam, the earthen piece has never breached. I've been in town for a while, over 50 years, and we used to play down there and fish down there. We had a boat down there. We had a fort down there, and so did at least one person on this board who I know was familiar with that property as well. So it was just an unusual kind of shocking letter.
But is, in the end, if this goes forward, somebody has to pay to replace the dam, right?
No, not necessarily, not at all. So if from a private standpoint for us, we have kind of two choices here, right? We either breach the dam, which is generally speaking inexpensive. It's a process. We would go before, the state would give us additional letters. We would apply for some grants. We'd go before Conservation Commission. There would be public hearings. We'd need an NOI. Perhaps it goes to DEP for Chapter 91 things. And then you get the permit. Perhaps it gets appealed by neighbors. But ultimately, it gets granted. You break the concrete dam, and it drains the pond. And that's perhaps more simple. I'm sure there's more pieces to it, but that's one avenue. And the second avenue is to, in essence, develop the property for the community. So I'm not sure, with if you could give me a specific example, how does that enrich the landowner? If you give a perpetual easement or all sorts of easements.
I don't know. In the end, and maybe this is better to talk offline, but I'm totally confused. I have no idea in the end what this is intended to do with it. I can't tell if we did the whole thing, it would cost us $5 million, $3 $300,000 or what, and we would end up with. So again, it's, if we're gonna put town money into it, I think we have to be very clear for everybody what it is we're gonna get out of it, and it's not clear at all to me.
Understood. So another driver for us was the fact that we saw it in the master plan. That was outside our input, as landowners, and it shows up in essence as a parcel that the town wants to use. And we thought that there was, in essence, a symbiotic relationship there, public-private, where, initially, through a board or a body like this, you fund engineering at some level. That request of $300,000+ has a allowance in it of $150,000. So you could do most of the engineering here for a bit over $150,000, and that's, probably high quotes, right? It will probably come in a lot under that. That would give you the basis for design. It would give you the basis for the community to design what they want. And then those questions you have about cost would get answered. Like, for instance, you could do some base estimates to build a bridge. But in order to get that, you have to do the engineering, because you have to do borings, you have to figure out the soils and what type of bridge and so on. I don't think those are costs that a private owner would incur, particularly since that bridge would be a community bridge. There's a big piece of land along the pond on the backside that I would assume would be a park or something like a park. And certainly, I think the proposed trail at some point would connect to it. So it's obviously has a lot of complexity, and apparently needs more dialogue. But we have to, in essence, advance somehow, right? Dam Safety wants us to do something. We've retained GZA, a big engineering firm. They do reports every 6 months. They give us advice. Our next step is either apply to Conservation Commission to cut all the trees on the dam, which Dam Safety wants us to do, or say to Dam Safety, look, we're trying to create this public-private partnership. Will you let us kick the can down the road for a year or two while we figure out what can be done on that parcel? In essence, I would look at the basic or initial engineering is study fees, option fees, meaning it gives the option to the community to figure out how to use that parcel. Hopefully, for me, it sounds, reasonable and it's rational, like it logistically kind of lays out, but perhaps if you're not fully engulfed in the process of talking to the engineers, it's harder to kind of get a grasp on.
John, are you still thinking, or more question?
No, I guess I'll defer, and I don't mean to hold up the wheels of progress, but I'm really having difficulty understanding what it is and what it's eventually going to be, and somehow, for me personally, unless we have more clarity on that.
So one recommendation I can propose is that if you'd like, we can take you on site and show you the opportunities. We can walk in that area, and I think with a little creativity, it's not the greatest time of year, quite frankly. It's quite beautiful in the fall. But you can see the areas of opportunity throughout kind of and around Sutton Pond.
I think one of the things I was going to suggest for this and for other projects was, I think you had mentioned it last meeting, Terry, is a potential site walk of a few projects, and I think this would certainly apply here in this instance, try and get a sense of that, so, okay.
And who from the town have you already walked it with, and what was and how did that go?
Sure. So we've walked with Conservation. We walked with Jean and Andrew. We walked with Dam Safety. We've walked with our engineers, with the town engineers, so GZA and GPI. Am I missing anyone? Mary Rimmer, who is our environmental consultant as well, who we've retained to give advice on a myriad of issues. Is there?
Abutters.
All right, we'll keep moving around, and more questions may arise, and happy to come back to you, John, if you think of other stuff as well. Tim?
In concept, really high level, this is, something that I see as a jewel for the town. the way it's laid out. And is it fair to say that it's moving towards a private-public relationship consortium of putting all this stuff together in accordance with the town's master plan? And I'd like to, almost like want to hear Andrew come up.
We'll invite Andrew up to answer.
But I'd be interested in his take on it, and I understand what John's concerns are. But to me, it is a complex, moving, put it all together, and if it all comes together as you envision, it could be a very nice thing for our town, the downtown part of our community. And it would actually draw people down there. And that's just my non-technical, non-legal view of things, so more aesthetics.
I understand the concept of the project, I understand that. My question, I guess, was trying to figure out how funding for the engineering, what benefit the town gains from that at this point. Down the road, certainly, it could be contingent upon what's developed. I guess what I'm struggling with is how do we support that request to do the engineering and pay for it, not knowing that anything is going to come to fruition from that. You may determine that it's not cost effective to make repairs to the dam, and maybe you go in the direction of removing the dam. I guess I understand the whole concept of the project. I think it would be a great asset to the town. I'm just having a little problem with understanding how we fund it.
So that's a great point about the cost of the dam itself, and we've discussed that extensively with our engineer, GZA. And my understanding is that it would be wonderful for Andrew, or I don't know if Gene or Andrew is working with GPI, the town's engineer, who, by the way, I got the scope for this application from. I'm told that if the community is involved and makes the application, there's a tremendous amount of funding at the state level to pay for the dam restoration, to pave over the dam. In fact, the engineer who is running the project for the town, when we met with her, she said, this would be a perfect place to build a walkway over the top of the dam. Dam safety allows that. It was her idea that kind of at the bottom of the dam to build what she called a pocket park, because it's the waterfall, and there's the old culvert that goes under Sutton Street, made of brick. Beautiful sitting area. It's really peaceful and nice in that area. So much of our application and kind of the vision was derived from our town's, hired engineer, and also knowing the property, owning the property, being on the property for many, many times in different locations as well.
Bill?
I think all my concerns have been addressed.
Terry?
Yeah, the reason for my question was I was hoping that Andrew or somebody could speak to it, who walked it from the town, and what they thought the benefits were and what they got out of the walk scene, as we haven't had the opportunity yet,
Jack?
Yeah, I think, as Tim had said, I think this is a wonderful feature for our downtown area, the pond itself. And to eliminate the dam and eliminate the pond wouldn't be a good thing for North Andover. And I think a link to the master plan is essential to define the benefit for the town itself. Because absent these benefits, absent the community benefit, the community value, it kind of comes down to what John said. You've got a property right now with a dam that needs work, and you're going to get a new dam out of it. That's a benefit to the landowner. It is, but with the larger community benefit, consistent with the master plan, I think it's a communication issue, from what I can tell, or from what my opinion is. And I think it would be a shame for that dam to go. I will mention too, and you mentioned your involvement with conservation. This subject has been before conservation, but it was very narrow. It was removing the trees from the dam, as recommended by the state. So we've got some awareness of it, and I think it's a good idea for this committee to get a little bit more awareness of it. And I tend to think that that's the path that needs to be followed to, if it's gonna actually happen and we preserve that pond. We really have to get a strong linkage, and it's gotta be clear to people at town hall, or town meeting, I mean, because this is something that it isn't a straightforward project, so I'll leave it at that.
Ron?
Yeah, definitely not straightforward. But in terms of justifying cost to the town, I mean, just the fact that we could potentially lose Sutton Pond, you know, the loss to the town of another large body of water like that, I think just gives all kinds of justification to at least partial funding. I'm not sure, but even $300,000 to me is enough to investigate, is worthwhile to investigate not losing that body of water.
Can I ask another question? So if a rail trail was created over the dam, who then becomes the responsibility of maintaining the dam? Is that something you would be looking for the town to do, or is this some sort of mutual agreement that would be worked out? I guess
Of maintaining,
the dam over time. As that passes, you own the pond, you own the dam, so I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on.
so I think that would be memorialized in whatever agreement, between the landowner, whomever that may be, and the town. And I suspect that would be an answer based on how much of the rights get ceded to the town. To John's point, if you deed it all to the town, well, now it's the town's responsibility.
Yeah.
Perhaps if the landowner has, some X usage or something like that, then there would be cost sharing. I mean, hopefully we made it clear in the application, the intent isn't to do anything less than give, generally speaking, these lawyers work out these agreements, but in essence, all the rights to the property, but for the fee, meaning, that there's all sorts of restrictions and kind of overlays that you could put on that property that de facto gives the town all the rights. When in fact, the underlying owner of the property preserves their rights. So, if perhaps the building changes or, the medical use changes and some other uses there, I think that land may be in the, that the town was looking at for housing in lieu of the medical use. So, and obviously, because of the pond, because you're subject to the Rivers Act, because, that is a river, it's Kachikwick Brook or river. River. There's all sorts of restrictions just on that itself.
Yep.
So, those small details would definitely be worked out. And apologies to the board and to Gene and Andrew. I didn't want to complicate the application, but given that I do this professionally, I kind of thought through what the engineer had said for scope of work, and I thought about cost savings. And by way of example, perhaps the way the engineer who quickly developed that scope so that we could get the application in timely to you folks, they had missed wetlands evaluation. So I thought, well, a survey is in that scope. It's upwards to 70,000. It'll probably be a lot less, but let's just call it what their original budget is. And if we don't go out there with an environmental scientist, Mary Rimmer, who we work with extensively in different communities, and she goes out and identifies all the wetlands, the surveyor will have to come back yet again, and it'll be another $50,000 to the community. So if we spend, if I spend or the community spends $10,000 to hire Rimmer Environmental, delineate all the wetlands, show us where we could potentially do things, then we survey it, that's the appropriate kind of sequence. And I thought it would be helpful to put an allowance in there that was completely controlled by community development as they're currently working out there, and that they could say, well, as part of this application, in order to gain cost savings or perhaps scope changes, or perhaps the community has input, they want different things, that would give the flexibility to properly design and get that kind of due diligence and engineering work done up front. I know my pace and Sasha's pace is probably far different than community development. They have many, many different projects to do. We're super focused on this. If we had more time, we would probably be on the same exact track as the town. The problem is our time was dictated to us by the state of Massachusetts and the Dam Safety Office. To your point about conservation, it's not whether or not the trees are going to get, or we could not cut the trees. Dam Safety didn't say, think about it, or talk about it, or deliberate about it. They said, cut the trees, all of them. And I said, no. And some of the community was with us, including the conservation administrator. She was literally standing there, and I said, there's no way I'm going to cut 100-year-old trees without advancing this through the community and having a broader discussion. You guys are going to have to just sit back and wait. You know, let's work on this together. So, and hopefully that got communicated back to the board. I know that there was a board member there when that conversation transpired.
We didn't really get many updates after that. We were just kind of like, okay, it's on hold for now. That's all we heard.
All right, I just have a couple of questions, and I'd like to hear from Andrew Shapiro as well. So in your initial application, you guys identify 11 dams and culverts kind of throughout that whole water flow. Have there been any discussions with any of the other property owners about, because I think only just one or two is on your parcel, correct? Is there any discussion with any other property owners today?
So just one is on our parcel.
Okay.
I had discussions. I think that right now, the next dam structure is in front of Conservation Commission, and they have engaged an engineering firm, perhaps GPI, the same one the town is using. And they're also, their dam is rated at some lesser rating, and they have to upgrade it. And then I believe most of those other pinch points, if you will, of Kachikowick River are in essence under roadways.
Okay.
You know, whether it's the hatch at Lake Kachikowick, where the water flows from the lake into Stevie's Pond, or Stevens Street, where it goes under to the Mill Pond side. Those are all things that my engineering firm didn't think that we had to study. The town's does, perhaps for larger reasons. My engineering firm said, have Dave Steinberg give you the data he has for his dam on High Street, and that will give us sufficient design data. So that number may come down significantly. And I don't remember the number of that particular line item, but depending on where we end up in the next couple months, that was a worst case scenario if the town's engineering firm had to do the study. So John, as far as scope of work, right, a lot of that work is not just Sutton Pond. That work goes all the way to Lake Kachikowick. And it's the town's engineer who had recommended that the hydrologists do that study, so they could study all the way along, all the way to the Merrimack River, what the impact is of water flows from Lake Kachikowick.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions right now on this, but I would like to hear from Andrew Shapiro if you guys don't mind.
Should we step down?
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome back.
Hey, do you guys want to ask me specific questions, or do you want me to just jump into some of my thoughts, or how do you want to?
I mean, maybe if you give us a handful of your thoughts, which may prompt other questions, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. So I guess my first thoughts are, I definitely appreciate the partnership that both Sasha and Joe have exhibited so far as, property owners in an area where we obviously are, as you can see, trying to plan for, conceptually at this point, a multi-use path. Could end up being more of a pedestrian trail. We're still sort of figuring that out. That would connect Main Street and loop around to High Street by way of going over, hopefully, Sutton Pond, as was envisioned in our master plan, as was also envisioned in a downtown improvements master planning process. And it's really exciting because, We treasure the natural assets we have in town. We treasure recreational opportunities, more paths, more connections. That comes up very frequently in all of our planning documents. And this is certainly one way we want to do it. And the only way we're going to do it, especially in an area like this with so many abutting property owners, is we need that public-private partnership on several fronts, including in this case, and obviously with Black Swan Realty owning interest in the pond itself, and we want to get over that. There's going to be a needed partnership there as well. Mr. Pellich did reference toward the end of the comments he was making that there's sort of a timing and track issue, and I would definitely kind of resonate with that as far as we're right now. So we have GPI on board as our contracted engineer for this project. They've developed all the conceptual designs that you saw in the application, and they did that on behalf of the town. We worked with them, and we've talked to abutting property owners. In addition to Mr. Pellich and Ms. Weinrich, we've talked to Avalon Bay and RCG. We've talked to Clean Harbors, although we've only talked to initial contacts to Clean Harbors. They need to send this up the flagpole to their corporate real estate attorneys. And we still have yet to talk to, and we also talked to the owners of the Davis Salon building on Main Street, and we have yet to talk to another property owner who's on the other side of that property. So we have a little more work to do. We also want to do a more publicly facing engagement. We want to get people out to comment on the plans and the designs, get the more general area of the downtown's thoughts on this project, receive some feedback. So we have yet to do that. And then there's sort of like a what do we do next sort of situation. There's kind of a lot of different avenues and opportunities. One of the conversations we had with GPI was, if we want to put this, make this eligible for part of the MassDOT TIP process, Transportation Improvement Program, which we'd be able to receive funding through the state's transportation programs for the ultimate capital project. We would need to do certain things. We would not be able to, for instance, engage in right-of-way acquisition discussions because the state wants to have oversight over that process. So it would be premature for us to do anything in the way of right-of-way acquisition, negotiation, or processes if we wanted to be eligible for TIP. We may not ultimately want to do that or need to do that, so that's yet to be determined. As far as the studies and the engineering documents and the scope that the applicant put forward, I'm told by our engineer that much, if not all of it, would be helpful to the town's ultimate project. We would need to obviously do survey work. We would need to do hydrological analysis, mostly for the purpose of understanding how to deal with the piles, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to state this correctly, but so there's pilings there that remain there. We're going to have to remove them, and we're going to have to put in a new system to support a bridge structure that we want to have span that. So we need to do a hydrological analysis to understand, what we need to do there to appropriately account for, making a structurally sound bridge. And then, but with respect to sort of the open-ended $150,000 item that could be under community development's purview, I don't have a clear plan to communicate to this board as to how we would utilize that funding. I'm sure there'd be we could make good use of it, but I can't sit here and tell you what that is at this point because again, we're trying to figure out next steps as we speak. So, the last thing I wanted to really quickly address, I think Mr. Holland was asking, did the town visualize or envision that the property would be, useful for the uses intended in the application and shown in the application? Clearly we do, because we did site walk the property with Mr. Pellich, Mrs. Weinrich, and our engineers. We've also investigated other areas along the trail, and so we feel very excited about it. We feel encouraged. But again, we just feel like we have a long runway ahead of ourselves on this, and we do at the same time appreciate the level of urgency that the applicant has given the issues specific to the dam and what's being communicated to them from the state. So,
okay, we'll put it out to any questions for Mr. Shapiro. Ron, I'll start with you. One side. Oh. Terry?
Thank you for explaining that, but I have no questions.
Bill?
Yeah, no, it's neat. I mean, I didn't realize until I looked at it, the packet printed out, that, you know, there's an excerpt from the master plan in there that identifies it. So it does sort of make that very, you know, direct and clear to me.
Okay. I'm good. You're good?
So that, you weren't sure how you'd manage, or will you do that contingency of $150,000, but I thought I heard earlier that we're gonna do this thing the correct way. We wanna do a wetland study, and that's probably where that would end up coming out of. Am I wrong or right in that thinking?
So I know that I'll let the applicant speak if they want to address that. And I haven't gotten that far with our engineers to, and I take the applicant at his word that was communicated to him, that was necessary. But just, I mean, you have to keep in mind, so there's the project the town is managing with our contracted engineer, and that just hasn't, I mean, do you recall a conversation to that extent? So I don't know. I'm not saying it's not needed. I haven't gotten that far in our process with our engineer to understand whether that's necessary or not. And if it's necessary, when it's necessary.
Joe?
So, I actually did talk specifically about that with the town's project engineer. I think, as a Conservation Commission member, perhaps you could also, talk about it as well. In essence, when you plan a project out like this, if you sequentially, you would absolutely want to have the environmental assessment done first, where they come out, they tie off the ribbons, they locate all the wetlands, and then the survey comes, and while you're surveying topograph, when you're doing, in essence, you know, bankings and so on, you would absolutely want to have the delineation done first, and you would pick up, as I call it, you would survey and locate all the flags. You would locate, you know, where the channel is of the river. That's part of the hydrological study, because in essence you have the river and then you have what got flooded around it. So they would want to know where that is within the water body. Those are all things that you would incorporate into this process. And GZA would tell you that, Mary Rimmer would tell you that, and ultimately GPI will tell the town that as well.
Yeah, I would definitely support that point. It's the logical way to do a project like this. You want to define all your land features, including wetlands, before you survey them in, and then there will be a layer, a wetland layer that will be created as in the concept that you have, project concept that you have right now. So it is the right way to do it.
So if you had to redo this funding request, you'd break out as a single line item as number one?
So perhaps number one, yeah, or close there too. Again, that scope of work is literally from the town's engineer. I also have my own scope of work from my own engineer, because I had to kind of decide which road to go to and whether it made economic sense. I don't want to take the dam down for personal reasons. It's not economic reasons. John, I think when you go out to the site, perhaps you'll agree. It's a really, really nice site. It doesn't make sense, you know, to take it down. From a cost standpoint, from an application standpoint, if the community development wasn't in support of having a line item of 150, I would withdraw that and put in a line item. I have a proposal from Mary Rimmer. I asked GPI if they would also use Mary Rimmer, because she's so well known to the Conservation Board and trusted. They have their own wetland scientist who would be far more. Mary's about 20 or 25,000. I talked to her yesterday or the day before. And you know, GPI is probably twice as much. So it would make sense for us as a community, I think, to get that work done now, and also not have to survey twice. That's.
Okay. Thank you.
It seems like the challenge for this project is to ensure safety, basically address the state's concerns over that dam. So ensure safety and preserve our the beautiful feature that we have in our downtown. And how we do that, you know, you guys are the experts. But you know, I mean, those are the key points. So anyway,
Sorry.
Tim, John, do you have anything further for Mr. Shapiro? Okay. I just had one question, maybe I hope you could address for me, Andrew. You mentioned you're talking to Clean Harbors. The old easement parcel, or GIS may not be updated. Is that also owned by Clean Harbors, or is that still, you know the one I'm talking about, kind of curved part on the north side or east side of Sutton Pond? Between the building and the...
Yes.
Okay,
that is
that's
owned
all
by-
Clean Harbors?
That is Clean Harbors.
Okay. So there's no way to get from Main Street to essentially what you're drawing behind Avalon without going across Clean Harbors. Is that fair to say?
In the configuration they're presenting, yes. So one, I know that there is some, I think the applicant's property stretch, and again, I'm flying a little bit blind here because I'm not looking at the map, but I think the applicant's property stretches out a fair bit along the extent of the pond. The challenge there, though, for us is that it would deposit you next to the Sutton Pond condo property, and we've had extensive discussions with them, and they're not supportive of this project. And therefore, that is why, so we envisioned, actually, in another iteration of this, going over Osgood Pond. They own Osgood Pond, and doing something that was going to maybe start closer to where Town Hall is, wrapping into Osgood Pond, going over there, and ending over by the East-West Mill complex. So we were essentially stopping our tracks, no pun intended, at that point, and then we doubled back and we're looking into this configuration.
So part of to the broader point about where the property is and how you get access through back to Sutton Pond, Gene and I had talked about it, I think, last meeting, maybe after the meeting. And initially, I think the town had looked at coming behind where they're currently located and coming into the Sutton Pond property, but it's really gradient there. One of the things that I kind of thought through when I was looking at the plan is that perhaps the Sutton Pond land goes a lot farther into the backyards of the houses on Saunders Street and right up to where Town Hall is. If that's accurate, that means there is a flat portion, but we really don't know till we do a survey. So, in the event that it's more difficult, it's a lot more work to get easements from, I call it the chemical, I call it its old name. What is that? Clean Harbors, apologies. In the event that we don't put the trail on that side, perhaps, depending on the survey, you can default to the other side of Sutton Pond and not have all the encumbrances and literally just build the trail on that side. I had 2 different title abstracts done. Small Lockett Vaughn handled both of them for me. They outsourced it to a really, really good title abstractor. Both title abstractors came up with different opinions where the Sutton Pond property ends. Perhaps it ends at the base of the bridge where the condos are. So the condos position is we own that land. There's a probability that that's just not true. So until we get the survey, we look more closely at it, even site control is not clear.
And I guess on a site control aspect, and I think you've touched on this a couple of times, who determined that it's not possible to subdivide the property, for you to retain your commercial portion and not subdivide out the unbuildable portion? Has anyone looked at that specifically?
No, I mean, just being in that business, that's just something that I don't think for us makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
But like I had said, certainly we could craft an agreement that, in essence, cedes, all rights but that.
Okay. Andrew,
Just want to add another comment. So part of the struggle for me personally, and I don't want to speak 100% for the town because, there are other stakeholders that have to weigh in on this. But, if the town, in my view, or the project managers of this specific project were ready to, move forward in advancing to the next stage, we would certainly support, and we would be the applicant putting forward an application to the CPC or other bodies to gain funding. So the struggle for me here is and I don't want to dictate at all what the CPC should or shouldn't do in this case, but if they were to move forward in funding this application, let's say that $150,000 worth of wetland study, I don't know how I effectively utilize that as not having been the original or if the town has not been the original applicant. I don't know if there's a consideration there. There may not be. There may be no issue there whatsoever. I'm just simply suggesting this is a case in which a private property owner is applying for funding to do this scope of work. Some of it certainly has application to the town's projects, but I'm struggling in my mind on how to utilize that.
So if I understand your point correctly, I think there's a pretty simple remedy, and I've used it before in other communities. In essence, if what you're saying, by way of example, is you hire an architect to design a school, and the architect carves out something that says these plans are only for the community, right? So in this particular case, the board conditions that any contract that we sign as a private landowner has to be for the benefit of the underlying entity, Black Swan, and the town of North Andover, and issue gone. So that means you guys can use that data, and I think the big concern would be with the survey data, right? So if you hire a surveyor, they're gonna collect that data on a disk, and they keep selling that same data again and again and again, right? So if John Simons needs a survey done, and I'm his neighbor, and he goes to the same surveyor, they're not gonna resurvey it, they're not gonna redo the records, they already have that data, you pay twice. It's like an annuity for an engineering firm. In this case, how we bypass that process is simply put that contract in Black Swan's name and absolutely make sure it's in the community's name as well. And then we don't have that issue.
Is there something you wanted to add? Session? No? Yep. All right. Okay. Yeah, and I guess that just, it does touch on, I think what John mentioned, it kind of really at our outset, and I think you mentioned as well, is we just could confirm eligibility, right, from that standpoint to make sure that we can, that if we do decide to move forward, that we're allowed to move forward, given some of the gray areas. I think, no one is questioning the value of, right, saving Sutton Pond, essentially, right? And this question becomes, how do we do it, and how do we do it in the right way?
So contractually, if we just add that and make sure that that's, manage that process, those rights feed back to the town.
Yeah, we'll have to do some homework on our end, just to confirm that that's within the purview on CPC. So, all right. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you all.
Thank you so much
for hanging in here as late as we are. What did I tell you a couple hours ago? Hour and a half?
I knew that wasn't true.
I knew you were right. You're right. Okay, so folks, we are not done yet. We do need to go into executive session. So, can I get a motion to move to executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A6, to consider value and possible purchase of 0 Bradford Road, for public discussions of which may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the town?
Motion to move to executive session, as you stated.
A second? All right, this does require a roll call vote. John?
Yes.
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 Okay, we are in executive session.